Been talking about the 7 railroads in North America, beginning with their beginning history, but then also really comparing from 1950. All right, now we'll go to the freight units. This was the standard paint scheme for many years. Initially, they had railroad Roman lettering, and but then they went to a Gothic. This is an F9, 1750 horse, and they also had F7s and F3s and FTs. Great Northern got early into the F units, and they all basically looked like this.
Looks like an F7 to me. How can you tell it's an F9?
The louvers are vertical.
Oh, really? I thought the difference was 4 louvers and 1 ahead of the porthole.
As far as I know, the vertical louvers are F9s, and
Okay.
I'll check the number.
Oh, who cares? You know.
Yeah. See, this is an actually this is an F3, but
Yeah,
it's
right.
got the horizontal louvers, and
Okay.
modelers would like this because you don't even have to cut the decals, the 4, 5, 6. So, and this one is the 1, 2, 3. It's a NW2. It has a rounded windows. It's 1,000 horsepower, and these were bought right after the war. And you can see that they came with little stubby stacks, so the railroads had to stick stovepipe on them to keep the gases out of the cab. But it's been in for maintenance, and you can see they got the grill on upside down. This is supposed to be going up like this, and this is orange, and this is green. So you know, this thing was probably 15 years old at this time, so it's pretty good. This is SW7. Now this has, if you can barely see it, square windows, a bigger radiator, because this is 1,200 horsepower. General Motors finally figured out, and they made factory stacks on it. But this is the SW7. This is a GP7. Excuse me, it's 1,500 horsepower, and you can tell the GP7 by two grills, sets of louvers here, and 3 sets of louvers for the batteries. The GP9s do not have those. They have fewer louvers for those detail guys. And here's the SD9. They bought a bunch of these for branch lines and stuff like that. And then out west, they bought a few with dynamic brakes for some of the branch lines. This is an NW5,
right?
Which great, as we talked about, Jim Hill had many branch lines, and that's how he paid for the railroad. And so here we are going into North Dakota, and he's putting boxcars into the elevator, and as you can see, they're borrowing a C&O boxcar and
New York Central,
and a New York Central, so they're going to pay the per diem on them and use them because they didn't have enough boxcars.
Yeah.
So, but here's the classic.
There are only 13 of those things ever built. NW5.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was basically a switch engine on a road switcher underframe with road switcher trucks, basically in competition with the ALCO RS1.
Yeah.
So, and then here's the ALCO RS2, because the railroads were so busy, hungry for steam in the early 50s that they would buy from anybody they could get it, and so ALCO was selling these RS2s and RS3s, which was their most successful locomotive. They sold about 1,500 of them, something like that.
Really?
Yeah, and Great Northern sent them all out to the West Coast so they could consolidate the parts, because they're totally different parts from the EMD, and so they sold those. This is a GP20, and it's right after the merger. You can see this is probably down in Sioux City, where they had to run BBs for a long time because the bridge.
That bridge,
Missouri down there is pretty weak, so they couldn't run the big units on it. And these are the only units that didn't get renumbered with the merger, because the BN numbered their GP20s in the 2000s and the GP30s in the 2250s, because they're 2,250 horsepower, and the GP35s in the 2500s, and the GP40s in the 3000s. So, but this is basically the standard scheme. You can tell it's a GP20 because it has extra big fans here and a turbocharger stack.
Yeah, I understand that bridge down there. They used to run big power from here all the way down there to the east side of the river, and they'd take it off. And they put about 7 Jeeps on it, drag it across the river. Then they had big power terminal on the other side.
Yeah, it was, or sometimes they'd run them all the way to Lincoln. So you'd see these freights going down straight south, because it goes down to Lincoln from Sioux City and straight south. And you'd see strings of GP7s and 9s.
Well, when they replaced that bridge, it put a lot of guys out of work because they had 2 engine terminals they could shut down.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And our resident expert could probably give us the give us the word that they probably had to replace it, especially with the bigger cars and everything. This was in Havre in 1965. The guy in the yard told me that this was a caboose hop heading east out of Havre, and they were going to stop at various points like those branch lines we were talking about, and they would drop off 1 or 2 engines, and then they would go up the branch line and pick up the grain cars, especially because this was in the autumn. This is at Minneapolis Junction. It shows the standard scheme. Here's a F7 and a GP9. And then back here is a GP9 in the simplified scheme that came with the new units. And here's an F unit in the simplified scheme. So they basically said, well, we don't want to put the stripes on anymore because that's expensive. And this is orange. Well, it doesn't work out with the new units. So they kind of went to the simplified scheme.
Yeah. Okay.
And then here's an FA, ALCO FA out on the West Coast. And that has the simplified scheme as well. Now this was not far from your church, Craig. This was 14th Avenue Southeast. 1 block from 15th Avenue. This was there were like 8 or 9 tracks.
Yeah.
And the first ones are Great Northern coming out of the Union Yard, and in back there's the Chicago Northwestern. And they actually had to have a switch tender here, or a switch house. And this guy had this, he'd have this lever and he'd throw it and it would turn all the lights on. But you can see he also had to go flag. So now he's crawling up the stairs here.
Yeah.
Because the Great Northern is, this train was switching. So they pull across and then they back up, and the Northwestern would pull across and back up. So you probably, I'm guessing maybe you could get across here maybe a third of the time. So finally they just closed it down because there's a bridge a block away. So, but it was an interesting place to take pictures. So this is at Havre. Here's the GP30 with the new scheme, and a GP20 in the old scheme, and a GP9 in the new scheme. Very simplified.
Yeah.
This is a U25B. A little bit later one with the double windshield. Second order. This was the first General Electric unit I'd ever seen, because I thought, what the heck is that thing? And I walk over there, and sure enough, here's the label, and it said General Electric Corporation Universal Series. And I thought, whoa, that's different. U25B, but they were. This had a lot of advances. It was the first unit that had a pressurized car body, which of course the other ones had all these louvers, and the wind is blowing through with the dust. Well, here General Electric said, if we filter the air going into the engine compartment and the generator, it's gonna save maintenance, and it did. And there were a number of other things on the controls and things like that. So they sold fairly well. I mean, they took over. They passed up ALCO right away, right. But then it was about 20 years, and they actually, with the C40-8, they actually passed up General Motors in sales. So they had better.
So you could say you knew them when.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. This is a brand new GP35, and going on number 97, heading westbound, stopping for fuel and crew. And here's number 82 is their big hot eastbound in the morning. That's a U25B, GP35, U25B, and a GP20. And then this train came in from the east, from the Tioga oil field, which they now call the Bakken oil field. And as you can see, back then they did haul a lot of oil out of there, because they didn't have the pipelines and stuff. So
Yeah.
it was an oil train and harbinger of thing to come, because boy, are they hauling oil out of there now.
Yeah.
Oh,
Huh.
so thanks to the fracking.
Wow.
There
There it is.
General Great Northern was quite advanced. They always got whatever was new, and this was the first production SD-45 ever built.
Great.
Hustle Muscle, and it's now still around. It's owned by the Great Northern Historical Society based in St. Paul, and it either sits at Jackson Street Roundhouse in St. Paul, or it's in Duluth or other places, but it still runs, and it's still called Hustle Muscle.
I've seen it in Duluth.
Yeah, it's really neat. I'm glad they saved one. I'm glad they saved it, because it was the first one. And what'd you say, how many they sell of this thing?
1,200, something like that.
Yeah, it was a very successful unit, especially for a big unit like that.
The first 3 prototypes went to Delaware and Hudson that were prior to Hustle Muscle.
Oh, okay.
And those were the first EMDs on Delaware and Hudson, and they weren't used to them. So they swapped them to Erie Lackawanna in exchange for 3 U-33Cs.
Interesting.
So on the Erie Lackawanna, they were in kind of a hybrid paint scheme. But then when the Derico thing all fell apart, the relationship between Erie Lackawanna and Delaware and Hudson came apart, and Conrail was coming in and all that. The 3 of them went back to Delaware and Hudson, but they promptly dumped them in Mexico.
Sure. Well, the Mexican seems to love General Electrics, so
yeah,
they and they are master mechanics. Oh man, what they can do with a unit is pretty amazing down there.
Well, you look at some of those rebuilds that came out of St. Louis Potosi shops, just complete kludges. You look at those things, and when you're poor, you got to figure a way to make it work.
Yeah.
But
then you see videos of them going by at 70 miles an hour, and you kind of go, "Oh, that's pretty impressive."
The things they do with old school buses. They pick up school buses here, and they bring them down there, and they chop them, and they move the rear axle forward about 6 feet, and chop the back and real large back end overhang, so they can go through the narrow streets in those old pre-independence towns, those tiny little towns.
Sure.
So convert them into what they call chicken buses. Everybody's riding with a chicken on their lap.
Yeah.
Guatemala too.
And here's more General Electrics. These are a whole string of them at Minneapolis Junction. And this is a 1969 in Minot. This is probably number 83, passing the yard, because it didn't get switched. It was a pretty hot freight, so it comes cruising right on through. And this is speaking of U-33C.
Yeah, right.
And F-45, SD-45, F-45. So a lot of power, and this was a hot freight. So it's cruising right through, and it is in blue.
Yeah.
So here's the standard Great Northern Caboose, which they had for many years. They had a bunch of these, and they built them in the shops here in St. Cloud and also on the West Coast. Then they started buying production cabooses, and I'm not exactly sure who built this one, but Great Northern had them. Burlington had some. I think New York Central. They're streamlined, but they didn't buy very many of them. So. And then this car came out, and it is kind of became the standard until the end of cabooses. It's an international car, and they sold a lot of these. They kind of had all the features the railroads liked, and they were very durable. And we know them as the extended vision. And here's some brand new extended visions: the X128, or excuse me, 127, 128, and 129 in the blue. And then when they're new and in blue, they look pretty good. But after a little dust and dirt and rust, not the best. So Great Northern was also an early pioneer in the trailer on flat car, and they would load them circus train style, as they say. They would back the trailers on. Those guys are pretty good. And then they would back them off. So this is a 50-foot trailer with, I think they're like 22-foot trailers on a 50-foot flat car.
Wow.
And then Great Northern, their marketing department did all sorts of things with these are off the internet, a little pixelated there, but it kind of shows all the different paint schemes they were trying. But they finally ended up with turquoise. That was really big in the 60s. And in fact, Byron, I think you gave me a turquoise boxcar.
Did I?
And of course they start painting everything except the locomotives and the passenger cars. Everything was turquoise. And so this is a 55-foot center flow, which is made by American Car and Foundry, and these were very successful because they would load a couple of boxcars loads of grain in here, and that was, you know, and it was easy to load, easy to unload, and it didn't leak, and you didn't have to put boards in, and I mean these were very successful. They still build them. And here's the grain, ore cars, because the Great Northern had a big ore operation, which our resident expert, as I understand, is still in charge of, because he apparently knows how to run things out well up there. so he still gets to go up there. And this is a few years later, a pulpwood car. They do take a beating. So. And here's a sawdust car. These things are 60 feet long, and but like we said, the blue doesn't weather too well. Of course, this is probably 25 years after it was painted. But
yeah.
And here's a 50-foot boxcar about 30 years after it was painted, and yeah, the rust catches up with it. So
yeah,
well, that is the Great Northern.
Wow, nice job.
Very good.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's quite a railroad, a lot of history, and I just have tremendous respect for James J. Hill. He was quite a guy. Tough businessman, but very honest. So